After the divorce, Julian's mother moved him to Paris and then vanished into the glossy white lacquer marketing department of La Roche-Posay. He was on his own. Julian alone. At 15, he wasn't a boy, and he wasn't a man, and he wasn't becoming a man. The future, a story that had once held normal things, a wife, kids, that acceptable life, had been redacted, one line at a time, and replaced with nothing, so that he found himself holding pages lined with thick black marks, stranded in the present. It was 1986, the worst possible year to be Julian. It was 1986 and it was summer, and there were thousands and thousands of naked ladies. Paris was wallpapered with them. 15 feet tall, they careened down the avenues, affixed to the sides of huge, hinged buses. Some were headless. Breasts and torsos occupied the glassed-in shelters and the strange cylindrical stelae, Morris columns, that loomed on every corner like big fat bombs, announcing movies, advertising something, anything. It didn't matter what. Yogurt, a topless blonde laughed and ate. Tanning cream, a robot dog ripped the panties from a woman crawling in the sand. Scooters, naked ladies. Whiskey, trips to Tunisia, naked ladies, naked ladies. Julian shrank under their stares. Descending into the metro for the first time, trying to look as though he knew what he was doing, he found them towering even higher. 20 feet tall, 25. They looked down from every billboard along the tracks. Sometimes the same body repeated again and again in station after close station, and sometimes it was cousins in different fleshy configurations, stretched or bent. Julian kept his eyes on the tracks, on the black tires of approaching trains. On Sunday afternoons, men in white coveralls appeared. They tore the women from the arched walls overhead, and then chatting, damp cigarettes stuck to their lower lips, they glued back fresh acres of flesh, one strip at a time. Julian felt surrounded. Julian hid in his clothes. School was weeks away, and Julian knew no one. The apartment his mother took for them was divided by a courtyard, 2 rooms on the front of an old building and 2 rooms on the back, with a public stairway and 2 locked doors between. His mother's room was in the front with the kitchen on the other side, and it was to those rooms that she returned when she came home from work, late. It was as though Julian had been dropped into another life at 15 years old, into his own apartment, to live alone. And sometimes at night, lying in his bed, he would sense a light snap on across the courtyard and look out into the rooms opposite, always with a little surprise that the woman in the window, taking off her heels and opening her briefcase at the kitchen table in silence, could be his mother. It looked to Julian as though she were in another building altogether, and it was easy to imagine across that space, framed in the far window, that she was a person he had never seen before. She would pour herself a glass of wine, as if she had always been French. Sitting with her legs folded beneath her, she would study her papers, swirling the wine in her glass. Julian tasted toothpaste. Every day, Julian walked. And pushing further into other neighborhoods, he found that, among the thousands of naked ladies, below them, there was one naked man, almost naked. One single, almost naked man. Excuse me. It was a square poster that contained the man. Small. It hung only in the windows of record shops, but it too was repeated across the city. It was black and white. It was a man in tight white jockeys, youngish, strong, a brush of stubble across his face. He held aloft a few days old baby with pale, reflecting eyes, tinted blue to stand out against the monochrome. But it was the man who stood out. The man's body widened like a V above his white jockeys. His muscled thighs below showed curls of little dark hair. He was radiant. He was looking into the camera. He was supporting the baby in his muscular arms, but also holding him away a little, too, almost balancing him. Julian saw this and knew, felt sure, that the baby was an excuse, an idea of fatherhood to make the man possible, an excuse to remove his shirt and pull off his pants and put him out in public in the street to be seen. The baby was a way of saying, go ahead, look, this man isn't gay. This man that you are looking at, this man with the beautiful body, this man is a father. It is 1986, and this beautiful man does not have AIDS. Julian learned the shape of the poster, the pattern of shadows it made, and he could feel it from blocks away, an entomologist's pin with a tiny red flag stuck into the edge of his eye. He crossed the street. He held his eyes to the cigarette butts and the plentiful dog shit. He hid under his plaid, his hands clenched to his sides, while the 15-foot ladies smiled and laughed far above, throwing frisbees, tumbling naked from baths of Perrier and fresh milk, while Julian was in the street below, filthy and scared. Julian walked for 2 weeks. Late on a single afternoon, just before the new school was to start, Julian set out from the empty apartment, without direction, threading his way through pedestrian alleys. These were lined with stalls selling food, each one manned by a foreigner who yelled out, heckling and leering. They cut strips from spitting gyros or threw plates to the ground, shattering them, shouting, "Opa, Opa." They were dark or olive-skinned men from all over the world, and they had all apparently agreed on a uniform of tight pastel t-shirts. Julian was startled that they had mastered French. They used it so rapidly he understood nothing at all, but they seemed to tease, cajole, and joke with one another, tossing impossible syllables over his head, and then to comment in a low murmur on the tourist girls passing by, with smiles in their yellow-green eyes. Their looks did not include Julian, and therefore he thought, so far, safely invisible. He crossed the river at Notre Dame, mingling with the lingering crowd on the apron in front, the summer light orange on the big carved box, Notre Dame, Our Lady. His mother had given him just this one warning as a welcome to France. Bombs were exploding all summer at places like this. No one knew why. Pipe bombs. A section of pipe filled with thousands of carefully cut match heads, threaded and sealed. Julian imagined the craft, the long hours sitting at a table somewhere, the dedication. He imagined the detonation, shrapnel. People milled about in the heat, tourists, African men selling postcards and Eiffel Tower junk from open suitcases. Groups of expressionless teens were splayed out on the baking pavers, walled off behind their sunglasses. Julian, hands in pockets, loped away. His way of moving was studied, practiced, as unmusical as possible. He walked to show that he cared about nothing, that he might have someplace to be, but that he had no hurry, that he shouldn't be stopped or questioned, but that nothing mattered anyway. On the far side of the river, he found a broad park and traversed its white gravel length, finding, at the end, but still inside its gates, a little tea pavilion shaded by huge oaks. Green metal chairs were scattered about, and he folded himself into one. He ordered, from a young woman with a rag in her hand, a Coke, un coca. This was practice for the more intimidating and busier cafes out in the city, staffed by serious, impatient, beautiful men, and frequented by people who really did have places to be and real lives to return to. But it was fine. The young woman, perhaps not much older than Julian, really, nodded. She understood. She returned and produced the Coke, tiny and perfect, in a small green bottle, scuffed a little on its edges. Here, they still collected them, washed them, and brought them out again. Julian remembered from when he was little wooden crates stacked in a candy store, filled with empty bottles. The liquid inside was tart and bright with real sugar. He leaned back, supported by the cool metal of the chair. The afternoon light was longer now, and the oaks scattered it and broke it, dappling the green table and the small green bottle and Julian's face, and it felt so good, so adult, to be sitting in this place having ordered, having asked, and having received. A herd of boys flew past, not more than 9 or 10 years old, whooping and galloping, beating the dust from the scree. Pretending to be horses, they were racing, ridiculous, joyous and unself-conscious. They held their arms to their sides, horses having no arms, of course, and their heads were down, so that they hardly saw where they were going. They skipped as they ran, and this was all okay. The music of it echoed in Julian's head, the boys' laughter, and wasn't France supposed to be a little bit faggy? Didn't they like art and music, and care about things, and make movies where grown men cried? They did, they surely did. The horse boys were gone, whooping somewhere else in the park, or out in the city, leaving just the dust in the broken light and the quiet under the trees. This was a moment when Julien thought that it could be better in Paris, that everything might turn. He drank down the last of the sweet, sharp Coke, felt it, furry, on his tongue and teeth. He stood. He thought that maybe here, in this weird city where he knew nothing, where he could understand nothing, that there might be a place for him.